Welcome back to Dominion Strategy 101. So in part one, we saw the snowbally feed forward effect of having better early turns leads you to having better later turns. In part two, we saw how adding cards to your deck which don't make you see your cards less often can have a bigger impact, and how getting rid of bad cards can have a good impact, just as good as and sometimes better than adding good cards. Part three here, we're going to take that to the next level and try to draw more often. So Peddler makes some money and draws a card, and drawing a card was better than having that extra money. If we take that to the next extreme, we can get to Labs. Labs draw two cards instead of one, but instead of a money, they get you the extra card, right? So Peddler compared to Silver, it trades one money for an extra card. Lab compared to Peddler trades the other money for another extra card, right? So when Peddler is better than Silver, more or less Lab is better than Peddler. We're also going to introduce Chapel. Chapel is a card which lets you thin cards very quickly. Thin, basically, you get the bad cards out of your deck. Now, before, when we looked at removing a copper, copper wasn't that much worse than your average card, so removing it usually helped, but not by very much, so it wasn't worth going out of your way to do. However, what we're going to see here is that sometimes it can be very good to do. And so now what we see is we're drawing almost our whole deck. Market here is another Peddler, which also allows you to buy more than one card in a turn. So now I'm drawing over my whole deck, and here we're going to thin down a little bit more, so we are actually drawing our whole deck. We can add more Peddlers, and the world is our burrito/oyster. We're drawing our whole deck, and let's actually play our action so I can buy more Peddlers here. What we're going to see is once you get to this point where you are drawing your whole deck, did not mean to click that, where you are drawing your whole deck, your money starts to explode much more quickly, right? So what we see here is we get to draw every card every turn because we've thinned out so many of these cards, and we've added labs to help us draw cards. So we get to draw every card every turn, and that means that instead of seeing every 4 turns as we might for when we were adding silvers, or every 2 turns when we were just adding peddlers, we get to see the benefits of every card every turn because we shuffle our deck every turn. We see every card every turn. So if I add a peddler, that doesn't make me 1 money every 2 turns. If I add a silver, it doesn't make me 2 money every 4 turns. If I add a peddler, it makes me a money every turn. If I add a silver, it makes me 2 money every turn, so long as I can continue to draw my deck. And that allows us to go from last turn we had 10. This turn we have how much money? Well, we're going to see. We have 14. So you can see it really feeds forward here. Next turn we're going to have how much money? $21. So you see we increased our money by 7 in a turn, and it really explodes upwards from here, right? We draw our whole deck, and now we're up to making 25, right? We added 7 again. Now what are we up to making? It's a lot more clicking in a turn, you'll notice, but you get big benefits because you get to click a lot more. Now we're up to making 34. So you just expand on how much money you're making very, very quickly once you're drawing your deck. There's two caveats, right? One is that you need to be able to get to drawing your deck. And if you invest too much time into, well, there's a few caveats. If you invest too much time into being able to do that, it could be that the game is over. Now, with a card like Chapel, you're not investing too much time. It's very quick. In fact, usually if you can get to drawing your deck, it's going to be fast enough, usually. So that's not a big caveat. But there are some caveats. So one of the caveats is once you are drawing your deck, then these peddlers, right? The advantage of peddler over silver is that it draws an extra card. And if that extra card is worth more than a money, then the peddler is better for you than the silver. But the problem with that is it assumes that it's drawing a card. Once you've drawn your whole deck, adding extra cards to draw more doesn't actually help you because you're not actually drawing anything. So you're not actually making more. So be aware of that. It is often nice to draw a little bit extra, either because you can gain a card in the middle of your turn and play it. So that's the nicest case. But just to be able to reliably draw your deck every single turn, if you're not quite as thin as you would be, say, in the Chapel Down case, it's important to try to be reliable in drawing that whole deck in some cases. So sometimes you overdraw a little bit, but if I'm overdrawing by 6 or 7 cards, then these extra cards that the peddlers are getting me isn't very helpful, and they might have been better as treasures, which just made more raw money in that case. So that's a major caveat, is don't add a bunch of extra draw for no purpose whatsoever. However, the flip side caveat is you need to be able to keep drawing in order for this to actually be making more money. And usually you're going to want to add some green cards at some point, and that's going to make you, well, it's potentially going to make you draw less, as we're going to see here. I didn't draw my deck now, and now I make a lot less money, right? So pretty often you're adding more money while you're adding some draw cards as well, and that makes it slightly less valuable that I'm making 5 times as much money a turn, because some of that money has to go to more draw. However, I do want to stress, because I was drawing like 5 times as many cards, or I was making 5 times as much money, something like that, right? Well, even if I have to use 20% of that money to draw more cards, it's still worth it. I'm still using way more money effectively. Even if I have to use half the money to add draw cards instead of payload cards, payload being basically money and buys, I'm still better off, right? And here I could have ended the game, but I'm going to want to show that if you do keep adding more draw, it is possible to get back to the place where you are drawing your deck again if you can add more draw. So usually you want to mix between, once you get to drawing your deck, you add a little bit more draw so you can keep drawing your deck, but you also want to make sure that you're adding enough payload to actually continue to build things more. The last thing I want to look at is that it's not just labs that help you draw your deck. It can also be other kinds of cards. And this is, and the labs can be more helpful even if you aren't thinning down with Chapel, but Chapel really exacerbates it. So the other way you can try to draw your deck is with Smithies and Villages. Smithies is shorthand for any card that draws you multiple cards but doesn't give you an action back. And Village is short for any hand, well, there's contention on what constitutes a village, but basically it's a card that lets you play multiple actions in a turn where the other actions don't necessarily give you the action back like a peddler does. So here we can start adding these kinds of cards, and you see if you get the village and a smithy, then you can be ahead. Typically you want plus buy to help you out a little bit. Here we can, actually I should trash this copper probably. And this works well with getting the peddler's plan as well. These things work together. Here I don't need the draw, right? I'm very overdrawing, so I want to be adding more payload faster, so I go for a little bit more bang for buck payload. In this case, it's gold. In a lot of other kingdoms, it's going to be some other action cards which do some economic benefit for you, besides just peddlers, say. But here we're going to add gold and some peddlers. I'm still overdrawing a lot, so adding treasures is again more useful than adding peddlers. But now I'm on the brink of not being able to draw again, so I want to build by, so I just went from 12 to 19 here. You can see how much faster you can explode when you are drawing more of your deck. But we want to note here that getting plus buy is really important because you want to be adding multiple cards a turn. If you're only adding one card a turn, it doesn't matter if I'm making 34 money on a turn. I'm still only going to be able to buy one thing. So that's also typically important in these games, is to be able to add multiple cards a turn. Otherwise, making the extra money doesn't do so much for you. Still might be useful to thin down, but not necessarily. And we see that as we add more stop cards, we get to be a little bit less reliable. So we drew this market dead here. So I'm going to add another village now for reliability. We don't need all of these villages, but it helps. We want another market to get more. And because we're still overdrawing, we're going to add a gold. Optimizing, which what you're buying at this point is not so easy. You have to really sit and think about it. Again, another reason why Dominion is actually a good game to play. But you can see, this is turn 14, we're making a ton of money. Now, there's a whole lot of other topics that I haven't covered in these just super intro decks, which is like, when should I start getting provinces? When should I worry about other green cards? Do I need to worry about attacks and interacting with my opponent with piles running out and all of this kind of stuff? And those are all important things to think about, but they tend to require real game situations and opponents and things like that. So this is going to do it for the end of this series, right? And basically, let's just recap what we've learned over the whole series. Having good turns early helps more than having good turns later on. Or having more good turns early helps you to have more good turns later on in this snowball effect kind of way. Adding good cards to your deck helps your deck. Removing bad cards from your deck helps your deck. Drawing cards lets you leverage the value of the money you're making more easily than if you are just adding cards that don't draw to your deck. And in order to make use of extra money, you typically need some way to get extra gains. Those are the basic fundamentals of building your deck in Dominion that come up most of the time. There's exceptions to all of this stuff, of course, but that is the general basic principles. Hopefully this series has been helpful to you, and we'll catch you again at some other point. You can check out Making Luck, which is a podcast I've been working on with Adam Horton, where we talk about individual cards in some more depth. We talk about some broader strategic themes. You can watch my videos just on this YouTube channel of me playing games, which incorporate large swaths of strategic advice. At some point, I will probably come up with some more strategic videos that go a little bit deeper than this series did. There are videos out there for Dominion homework that covers combos and things you need to worry about there. But just anyway, I hope that this series has been useful to you as a fundamentals of Dominion strategy, how drawing cards is good, adding good cards is good, early turns tend to be more important than later turns, thinning is good. Yeah. Anyway, that's it for the series, and this is WanderingWinder signing off.